member of the Philippine Women's Center of Ontario. So some of the speakers mentioned like working with groups like Kaisaka and working in countries outside of Canada. Like there's also like a lot of activism here in Canada that talks about like issues outside of Canada, and that like you have to like go outside of Canada to like experience these issues. So could you share like some of your experiences perhaps in like organizing like working with these groups, or like some of your perspectives behind how we can tackle this global issue comprehensively?
We work in, okay, for the last 10 years I've been working with farm workers here in Canada, but over the last 5 years I've been working in many of the rural communities where migrant workers come from, working with their entire families, their children, and that's where I've learned a lot about the children, you know, what they go through. And some of the children as young as 3 years old will say, you know, to their mom or dad, I'd rather eat frijoles, beans every day, than have you go to Canada. And anyway, so we see everything that we do here in Canada, you know, linked transnationally, you know, to communities. And, you know, I almost, like in the rural areas, for instance, I see that, you know, migrant workers that I work with at least, they're embedded in these trans-rural communities. You know, one rural community here in Canada to another rural community in Mexico or other parts of the Caribbean. Whatever we do here has just in the same way whatever happens to workers here has a ripple effect to their families and communities. Same with all of our organizing. And we work with organizations in Mexico that are fighting, you know, for workers to be treated properly and in a dignified manner. So, you know, we have to link with, you know, progressive grassroots organizations that have, you know, that are like-minded with our philosophy. Because, you know, when it comes to migration, you know, we're dealing with an issue that has a global dimension. We cannot solve or attempt to tackle migration if we just focus within the nation states here in Canada, because, you know, part of the problem of these categories that we have is because of the nation state category and organization we have to begin with. And our idea and what motivates us in our work is a world that belongs to all of us. Imagine that, you know, a world without borders. Imagine that. And so that's what really drives us. It drives us in our line of work. And so we can't stay within Canada. You know,
transnational organizing, two contradictory things come to mind for me in terms of what I've seen when I travel through different spaces, and the fact that I can travel through these different spaces. So the first thing is that the access. So what citizenship status and the actual kind of citizenship you end up getting allows one class of people globally to go wherever we want. We have access anywhere, and then if you don't have that type of citizenship or status, you can't. You know, the other side of that contradiction is so many families actually are transnational, exactly what people have been describing. There's so many families that are split across continents and do travel back and forth yearly if it's you know, doing this particular agricultural program, for example. So this is very contradictory because, you know, when I have traveled, I know that people are stuck. So the first example I want to talk about is Palestine and apartheid there. You know, when you actually, this is why it's so important to be in direct solidarity with groups, because to learn the specifics, it's so complicated, but then as soon as you hear the specifics, you get it, right? So in the Palestinian context, if you are Palestinian and you lived in the piece of land that became the state of Israel in '48, you're living under apartheid regulations within that state, but you have Israeli citizenship. There's things you can't do. You can't participate in the army or do anything. There's a bunch of things you can't do. People are aware of this. You know, when I spoke with people organizing in a community center in the refugee camps of Sabra and Shatila, they were the most politically conscious people I've ever talked to. And they were raising their youth, and they were teaching them how to play basketball, and they were explaining the politics of the world, and they were talking about imperialism in the region, and, you know, they got everything, right? So this is the contradictory piece of it.
There's so many issues that we need to talk about, and like even the policy, the temporary workers, we can expand that, the experiences of other workers workers in this country. But I think we really need to look at who we really are. You know, like when we are being divided and segregated, you know, especially the labor issue. How do we find, you know, ourselves in like coming together? How do we do that? I think it's part of that. And how do we then go back and look at, for example, the LEP or the labor export policies in the Philippines? When we went back to the Philippines for a visit and connect with the groups there, they also asked us to talk about our experiences here, because it's no longer, you know, our reality is here. And that's why we look at the experiences of the Filipino people and bring that back to the Philippines, and also the experiences of the Filipino people in their particular struggle back in the Philippines. So there is that connection, and we want to continue to have that connection in terms of looking at our situation here, and also building that solidarity with other groups like the Justicia. And I think for us, the way to move forward is to learn from our experiences, to learn from our history, you know, we think about who we really are, because we're workers, and then we have to look at also the intersectionality. I think it's really difficult. Even last night when we talk about class, race, and gender, because this is, you know, a really important issue for us to continue with our discussion, and we need to deepen that. While we're here working, sometimes in our community we don't even look at ourselves as belonging to a working class. This is something that it's mind-boggling when you think about it, because it is our labor that produces all this wealth, you know. And we know that we're struggling, and we know that we belong to this class, the working class. But how come we're so, you know, alienated from you know, looking at ourselves as workers and belonging to the working class? So in our discussion, I think it's really important, and